Lord Seventh, is a priest novel. This is an audiobook made by fans for other fans. Disclaimer. The main couple of the story is made up of two men. If you don't like it, don't listen. Thank you. Remember, subscribe and click the bell to stay updated on all the new releases. Enjoy. Chapter 26. Wordless Yearning. The sound of the pipa was akin to beads of jade falling upon a plate. It poured out from within a tiny embroidery shop, crisp and clear and in a small melody of unknown origin, as if a rural creek was gradually eroding the insides of people's hearts. ChiChi quietly listened at the doorway for a time before pushing the door open and coming in. The pipa stopped abruptly. Its lingering sound still circulated the room, but the woman playing had already stood up, bowing her head in obeisance. "Young Master Joe. You don't have to be so polite, Miss Sue," he hurriedly replied. She had light makeup applied, dabs of slightly upturned cerise at the corners of her eyes going outwards from dense to thin, scattering on her temples like clouds and contrasting with her soft face that shined white as snow. Her speaking voice was different from when she sang, a bit lower in tone. It was unlike the average woman's tinkling and sharp sort, rather having an odd seductiveness. Those gentle, comprehensive words, that skill in balancing both motion and stillness, she was both unlike the bland boringness of rich, unwed women who never stepped foot out of their house, and inferior to the aura of alluring boringness female prostitutes had. He couldn't help but mentally sigh. What man could resist a woman like this? "Go and rest first, Qingluan," Helian Yi ordered. "Zishu and I need to have a few words." So Qingluan wordlessly hugged her pipa and withdrew. "Come sit, Zishu," he said with a light nod. Zishu sat down at his side with a smile. "You really have luck with women, Your Highness." Helian Yi appeared to smile, but it was pretty perfunctory, and it died in a wink. He turned to gaze out the window, somewhat lost in thought. Zishu, being a conscientious and tactful person, also said nothing, then poured himself a cup of fruit wine, narrowing his eyes in immense enjoyment as he evaluated it. When a long time had passed, Helian Yi sighed quietly. Cai Jiangxing's incident was done by Beiyuan's hand. He didn't pose it as a question, so he was very positive about this. This is unpleasant to say, but, in any case, theater troupes in the capital have all subsequently made up a fresh folk story recently, narrating the tale of a fallen official's young concubine eloping with an adulterer. There's also rumors that state the grand steward of a scion's estate was witnessed helping a pregnant woman into a palanquin that very day, and someone who got a closer look said that the woman was precisely Lady Hu of the Cai estate. Helian Yi pinned him with a look. "What are you acting for?" he asked mildly. "Was that not precisely the little bug he entrusted you with, getting people to whip up, setting the whole city abuzz with the stench?" Zishu knew this nobleman had always loathed stuff like this, so he smiled in tacit agreement and said no more. Taciturn for a minute, Helian Yi then asked, "Why in the world did he want to make life hard for Caig Unseeing?" "I've thought about it for a few days and more or less have a general idea, but I still don't understand it much." The prince plans deep and far ahead. If even you can't comprehend it, Crown Prince, how can this commoner do so? Zishu countered casually. "However, he never does anything without reason, and he has decorum." "Be at ease, Your Highness." Helian Yi smiled with some bitterness, though. "What do I have to not be at ease about? Ever since he was young, he's been a little devil who only says a small portion of any words he has. These years, he's grown up, and even I can't see through him." Zishu was alarmed. He was used to walking Jianghu, and on top of that, he was someone who had a meticulous profession along with thoughts that were always ticking. Yet, he was ultimately unlike these folks that had been steeping in the court and palace since their childhoods, and would occasionally have moments of negligence. The instant Yi said that, Ch26 promptly realized that he had just misspoken, as the phrase "plans deep and far ahead" absolutely should never be said before the crown prince. Immediately, he hung his eyes. "The prince is plotting on your behalf," he said softly. "You seem to have trusted him before." He suddenly remembered Ch26. He had no official's position and was someone of Jianghu, so he normally didn't bother with trifling details, and was the one who accompanied Yi to come listen to her sing the most amount of times. He hadn't taken notice at first, but after a long interval, he had discovered that she was the type to lower her head in silence, resembling an extremely solitary person. Having remembered this article halfway through his speech, the following half of his sentence was not followed through. Yi raised his eyes to peer at him. The look the typically erudite and elegant crown prince had made Ch26's heart constrict from seeing it. Those eyes were deep, as if a far-down well was hidden in their surfaces, with no one able to make out its bottom no matter what. The crown prince was the heir apparent, after all. Ordinarily, he could be courteous to the wise, or drink and have fun with someone with no regard for manners, but nobody could touch on the worries in his mind. Suddenly, Yi smiled. Father Emperor plans on using his vast longevity festival to announce a decree. He's going to refer Grand Preceptor Song's granddaughter to me. So it's already been determined? Congratulations, Your Highness, Ch26 replied in a rush. Yi unhurriedly went on, however. On the day I told you all about this, all the others were shocked. You, on the other hand, heard it, then cast a glance at Jing Beiyuan, but I didn't understand why. Ch26's face paled. This commoner. Cold sweat along his spine began to drip down. The other just sighed. Look at you. I haven't even said anything yet, and the first thing you do is get nervous. Why are all of you like this? He lifted his head again to look at Ch26. You were thinking at the time that the main lead occupying the crown prince's mind was right before his eyes, so what was the meaning of him saying so? Was it that he's trying to test him? Correct. One was allowed to implicitly know such a thing, but they must never let others be able to tell that they knew. Ch26's mind turned about anxiously, but he wasn't sure what channel Yi got the news broken to him from. He had no choice but to withdraw a step to the side and kneel down. This commoner ought not to rashly make assumptions, and this is an offense that should be punished with 10,000 deaths, Your Highness. Yi chuckled lightly. Get on up. What are you doing, making a big fuss over a little thing? How is this even a big deal? If you could tell, then you could tell. I can't very well make someone gouge your eyes out. Ch26 consequently felt all the more on edge. Stand up, the other whispered. What else can I do other than have him be before me to see that he's doing very well? That itself is enough. You've always had some understanding of what sort of person he is. If I really did affix him at my side, to act as a, how could that not be out and out inanity? Between the country and my personal affairs, which one is serious and which one is frivolous are still things I can distinguish between. I mustn't think so preposterously. Only after lightly breathing a sigh of relief did Ch26 stand, but he didn't dare to sit back down. Were he to also have half of King Luan's mild-manneredness, I'd be fine even in rocky weather, Yi lamented. When night time came with the melancholy of spring, one was made to stand alone amidst fallen flowers, and most injurious to that light drizzle was a pair of flying sparrows. When all was said and done, Helian Yi was a clear-headed person. Since he had long known that the sad ringing of the evening rain would end in resentment, why make a vow on Mount Li at midnight for half a moment of joy? Based only on one fleeting silhouette, momentary entrancement, and a chat of yearning, it was all still liable to fall into a long and sparsely watered stream. As it flowed and flowed, perhaps, as years passed by, the feelings of youth would dissipate until they were no more. His actions these days have not been small, though, he went on. I'm still somewhat ill at ease, in the end. Watch him a bit more in secret. ChiChi quickly nodded and affirmed. Helian Yi nodded back, waving his hand. Go on. I will keep sitting for a while. Before the other could step out the door sill, he heard Helian Yi quietly speak up from behind him. Zishu, the matter of today is something you and I know. If it's... ChiChi swiftly turned his head back around. Seeing the young heir sitting half up within the shadow cast by the curtain, neither joy nor anger able to be told on his face apart from that pair of eyes that looked to have the viciousness of wanting to eat someone, there was a chill in his heart. Your Highness, this commoner is more reliable than a dead man on what should not be said. Please be at ease. Helian Yi just waved his hand again tiredly. The interior of the palace became bustling in the blink of an eye. Helian Pei's 55th day of longevity was regarded as a whole number, at any rate. The remnant might of Wei Cheng's case was yet spreading, and the atmosphere was tense, but the scions, grand scions, bureaucrats, and generals were all compelled by happenstance to initiate a new round of brain-racking. The weird cat Jing gave Helian Zhao could naturally not be gifted on the day of the festival, lest the notoriety of the eldest scion urges the monarch on in indulging in horseplay sat true. Celebratory gifts had to belong to the orthodox set of curios for million-year-old turtles that embodied the phrases of "May your fortune be as immense as the eastern sea and may you live as long Mount Nan." For that reason, when Helian Zhao entered the palace to pay respects a few days ahead of schedule, he handed over the dancing, perfumed cat then. He simply claimed that it was collected off of an unusual folk area by his own people and he didn't dare to monopolize the fame, so he was giving it to relieve Father Emperor's boredom, wholly using the thing to undertake filial piety on his behalf. The action of having an animal fulfill filial duty made Helian Pei so ecstatic, he promptly gave him a heap of rewards. If he didn't still have his last bit of rationality, he would have practically blurted out that he'd be sealing Helian Zhao as a kin prince that smells like a cat. Helian Pei had something of a childish personality, so once he got something good, he wanted to do a round of showing it off everywhere. He specially left the palace to take a trip to the Prince Nanning estate, even giving Jing a good show after freeloading a meal. Prior to being given to Helian Zhao, that cat had been kept in the estate for over 10 days, and everyone had long been sick of seeing it. But, upon seeing how enthused the emperor was, they couldn't expose that and had to feign novelty when accompanying him. In his mind, Jing was utterly unsure of whether to laugh or cry. Good and bad things were coming in an endless flow. Helian Zhao was clearly suppressing Helian Chi's means, so the latter having a happy event come along or being in a good mood or anything were things that couldn't be claimed. Once news of the crown prince's wedding came down, an old fox with a keen sense of smell began to take notice of the momentum behind his highness, whose reputation had always previously been decent. Helian Chi was at last coming to know what it was to act low-key, as he was covering up the Black Shaman enterprise. Jing entrusted ChiChi with making inquiries on him, but even he couldn't get any results for the time being. Evidently, the second scion was being cautious. Following the lesser half of a year, Lu Shen entered the Ministry of Revenue, finally able to spread his limbs out wide. Added on with Jing-Chi aiding him in smoothly sticking needles in and extending wires out all over the place from within, there was a moment of rising winds and tides. Yet, the prince estate also had an additional student. Ever since Jing-Chi learned that Wuxia slept for only 2 shishin a day and used the rest of that time practicing martial arts, he didn't have the nerve to drag him out to muck around like mad. However, Wuxia was used to coming over every noon to have a sit for a while, generally when Jing-Chi had just awoken from his afternoon nap. Helian Pei had never found success in assigning a teacher to the Chaminette estate, and Jing-Chi was having a flare-up of his loves-to-lecture disease, so he bluntly took advantage of the moments he was seated there drinking tea to talk about this and that. Wuxia was certainly a good student, in no way ignoring Jing-Chi's words just because he looked to be about the same age as him. So long as you were right, and so long as you were learned and he could learn something from you, then even if the young maidservant pouring tea was talking let alone Jing-Chi he would listen carefully with bated breath and rapt attention, never ever randomly interrupting. Jing-Chi was a slacker in this lifetime, but it wasn't because he didn't want to read any books. Rather, it was because he had read them all before, and he was too impatient to do so again. He couldn't claim to be all-knowing in the areas of scripture, history, religion, and poetry, but he used to study with the royal princes in the palace, so he certainly still had some academic achievement. On top of that, he was far and above more experienced than those semi-incomprehensible old pedants, as we Bass, never dull when teaching, easily grasped quotes from the classics, sometimes strayed from the subject when talking on and on, was able to string the 4 books and 5 classics together with the informal history of the court, then was also able to string them to military tactics without pulling back. Wuxia took it all in with gusto. However, it wasn't clear whether his temperament was the cause or what, but when it came to speaking of the art of war tactics, he always had a small bit of confusion about it. On that day, Jing-Chi was in the middle of lecturing history on the subject of several nations struggling for power in the previous dynasty. Upon bringing up horizontal and vertical alliances, he spoke with feeling. The so-called alliance members are, in truth, simply for a set period of time, consisting of people with the same goals. They are not permanent enemies nor any sort of permanent friends. At the start, one acts submissive to put on a show for the other, then scouts out for their weakness and goes straight for the kill, using bribery and enticement to make the other's attitude soften up. It can't be too deliberate, or else you'll look stupid and fall to a disadvantageous position. It needs to be done without batting an eye, and while making the event seem like lucky coincidence. Wuxia nodded. Just like you did to Helian Zhao. Jing-Chi sat up straight, getting invigorated. Right, but it's not enough like that. Do you know what's missing? End of the chapter. Stay tuned for more BL.